Okay, we're back. The second video on gene function, 203 gene 2. I'm going to get into alleles again. I brought up alleles in the last video. Remember what an allele is? It's genes that do the same thing in a different way. So they fit in the same locus, and they just do something in a different way, lead to a different, what's called phenotype. It's a way you look on the outside. And how tall you are, what color your hair is, your eyes, what your blood type is determined by the alleles you have at the loci that determine that code for the proteins that cause those characteristics. And every locus has at least 2 alleles. And many loci have many alleles that can fit in those particular, in that particular locus. So here's the thing, you have we have 23 pairs, well, females have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. That is, remember, you get one whole set of chromosomes from your mother, one whole set of chromosomes from your father. If you're a female, you have 2 X chromosomes and they're homologous. So are all the other chromosomes. Homologous means chromosomes with the same gene loci, the same genes. So one could be a paternal chromosome, you get from dad, a maternal chromosome, you get from mom. And let's say a gene A is you have 2 copies, so you have 2 copies of every gene that you need to make and maintain a human being, if you're female. You know, 1 copy from mom, 1 copy from dad. They do the same thing, but maybe in different ways. So here's the thing, you might, so let's say there's 2 alleles present, possible at that locus. So then you designate them as big A and small a. And this has to do also with dominance and recessiveness. One of these alleles is dominant, one is recessive. It's the simplest thing. And you could get 2 dominant, you could get a big A and a big A from both your mother and father. You would be homozygous dominant at the locus, homozygous. You get a small a from mom and a small a from dad. You're homozygous recessive. Or you could get a big A from dad and a small a from mom. Or a big A from mom and a small a from dad. That would make you heterozygous at that locus. You see. So genotype and phenotype. Genotype is what set of alleles you have at your loci, at a particular locus. That would be big A, big A, small a, or small a, small a. And big A, small a, and small a, big A, same thing. So they always, the convention is you always put the big letter first. All right. Now that would determine your phenotype. If this is a complete dominant situation, say, like I said, brown eyes dominant over blue eyes. So big A would be brown eyes, small a, blue eyes. So if you're big A, you have brown eyes. Small a, blue eyes. But what if you're heterozygous? Well, if brown eyes are dominant over blue eyes, then big A, small a is also brown eyes because it's dominant over the blue eyes. So that's your phenotype, how you look on the outside. And when I say outside, I don't mean necessarily being able to see that outside. Your blood type is a phenotype. But you can't just look at me and know that I'm A positive. But it's still a phenotype. See what I mean? Okay. So Mendelian genetic characteristics. Gregor Mendel, guy who figured out the basic characteristics of heredity back in the 19th century, middle of the 19th century. Complete dominance is something that he discovered. That is, you could have two alleles, and one is completely dominant over the other one. So in order to have the dominant expression of a trait, all you need is one dominant allele. To exhibit the have the recessive expression, you have to have two small letters. So that's what he discovered. One gene, one trait. So one gene controls one trait. That's not always true. Sometimes one gene can control two traits. Sometimes two traits are controlled by one gene. It's much more complicated than Mendel figured out, but these are called Mendelian characteristics, the thing that he figured out, the basic characteristics. So one gene, one trait. Two alleles per locus, just two alleles, a dominant and a recessive. Now we know that there can be lots of alleles, and there can be two alleles that are dominant and one recessive. That's true for the blood type locus, the ABO locus. Both A and B are dominant, O is recessive. You can have hundreds of alleles at a locus. Non-Mendelian trait. All the combinations possible. You know, it's complicated. There are some traits that are controlled by many genes. That's called polygenic adherence. Human height is one of them. Human skin color is one. So all different combinations are possible. And these are called non-Mendelian because they were figured out at the beginning of the last century, beginning of the 20th century, they started figuring things out. And so other people, not Mendel, figured those out. Okay, heredity. Only pass on a randomly chosen half of your genetic complement to your offspring. In sexual reproduction. In Mendel's first law of segregation, the alleles, he called them factors. Alleles are segregated out by the parents in a process called meiosis. And you make gametes that only have half the number of chromosomes as the normal diploid number of 46. Or if I got to say about homologous chromosomes, females have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. Males only have 22 pairs of homologous chromosomes in people, guys. Because males have an X and a Y, those are not homologous chromosomes. The chromosomes on the Y are not found on the X. The genes found on the Y are not found on the X. The genes found on the X are not found on the Y. So that's the only exception to the rule. Okay. So you only relate to your children by one half. You gave them a randomly chosen half of your genes to your offspring. And that's what sexual reproduction is all about. Scrambling of genetic combinations. The whole idea is to scramble things up to make new combinations so that your offspring are genetically distinct from you and distinct from all of their siblings. There are actually huge disadvantages to this. We don't have any asexual means of making human babies. Not now, and unless we start cloning human beings, and it's already against the law, even though you can't do it. They don't know how to do it. It's already against the law, but somebody probably will eventually do that. But we're doing pretty well the old-fashioned way, making enough people. There are huge disadvantages to this, though, because animals that make asexual offspring, they pass on 100% of their chromosomes to their offspring. We only pass on 50. In asexually reproducing organisms, all the individuals make babies. In sexual reproduction, only half the individuals That is, if you're not a simultaneous hermaphrodite. But in people, I don't make I don't give birth. Only females give birth. So that's a huge, so actually the persistence of males is a huge disadvantage. And why would you want to scramble up combinations? In most organisms, not in people, but in most organisms in the wild, very few individuals make it to adulthood and making babies of their own. Very few. And if they do so, they probably had a really good combination of alleles, So why do you want to screw that up? We do. We make, and despite the fact that sexual reproduction has huge disadvantages over asexual reproduction, it's the most common form there is. Almost every living thing has some kind of sexual side to it. There's very few organisms that just use asexual means. Yes, the advantages are uncertain. And actually, it's a big question. And you think, we figured out why sex is so prevalent, that almost everything is, sexual reproduction is way, way more common than asexual. Despite these huge disadvantages. And this is, one is thought to be possibly genetic, that if we have defective alleles. For example, if an asexually reproducing parent has a defective allele, then you pass them on to all of their offspring. In human beings, you got a defective allele. You may have a good allele, and most defective alleles, fortunately, are recessive. There are some that are dominant. There's very few that are dominant. Mostly they're recessive. So you can be what's called a carrier for a genetic disease, a recessive like cystic fibrosis or something. It's recessive, but you could be a carrier for it. And you might pass it on to your offspring, or you might not. You might pass off the good allele or the defective one. Hopefully, your sexual partner has good alleles. And even if you give a broken allele to your offspring, your sexual partner has provided your offspring with a good allele. So they're heterozygous, but they won't have the disease. They have to have two small letters. So if two parents are carriers or heterozygous for cystic fibrosis allele, there's a 25% chance that their offspring will have cystic fibrosis. So this is why outcrossing is a good idea, to find sexual partners that you're only really distantly related to, right? Why incest is a bad idea, because if we all have broken genes in us, guaranteed, you're carriers for some serious genetic diseases. You got broken alleles, but all recessive, and you have a good allele. So if your close relatives are likely to have the same broken alleles, to be heterozygous at the same alleles. If you find somebody who you're really distantly related to, remember, we're all related, just how distant. That's called outcrossing. That's a good idea because they're going to have broken alleles also, but likely have different broken alleles than you have, you see. So you're not likely to have a child with this genetic disease, right? The red queen hypothesis, though, is what's thought to be the main reason why sex is so prevalent and so important. And that is to keep ahead of our pathogens. And the coronavirus is a good example of this. Most pathogens, let's look at bacteria rather than viruses. Most, like say pathogenic bacteria, they mostly use asexual means. Bacteria have a sexual side to them most of them. Mostly they reproduce asexually. So you think they would change very slowly with time. Even asexually reproducing animals, for example, they're going to change over time because they have mutations too. But they change very, very slowly over time because they pretty much clones of all each other, and they make a few little mutations here or there. But here's the thing: their generation time is really short, 20 minutes. It takes 20 minutes for bacteria to make copies of itself, to go through. To make new cells. It'll just take 20 minutes. But how long does it take us to make babies? 12 years. Our generation time is 12 years, around 12 years. You got to reach puberty before you can make babies, right? So, so how many times have they copied their DNA? How many generations have a bacteria gone through in 12 years if they reproduce every 20 minutes? Well, immense numbers. You can figure it out if you want to. Immense numbers. And so they actually change pretty rapidly with time because the generation time is so short. So how do we keep up with that? See, we have locks that protect ourselves from these pathogenic organisms. We have locks, and they're always trying to find keys to the locks. And they're always mixing things up to find a good key for our locks. And sometimes they do. In pandemics, for example, the flu pandemic, this virus found a lock and killed lots of people. And here's coronavirus, found a lock that can kill a lot of people. So we have to scramble things up also to keep ahead of them. So that we change our locks, they're changing their keys, we're changing our locks. If we didn't use sex, our locks would be pretty much the same from generation to generation. And eventually they're going to find a key to it. But using sex, we scramble up the locks. And so they're scrambling up their keys. And by chance, they might get a good key that'll fit a lock. But likely not. So, and there are immense numbers of pathogenic organisms out there that are just trying to get at it, to try to eat it. And people with compromised immune systems find out about these, and nobody has to worry about because we have good locks. So we have to, this is called the Red Queen hypothesis, after Alice in Wonderland, where the Red Queen was running in place but never getting anywhere. And Alice says, why do you have to do that? Well, look, you'll fall behind. If you don't run, you'll fall behind. You have to run and stay in place to keep ahead. So that's called the Red Queen hypothesis. And it's thought to be the best explanation of why sexual reproduction is so popular, so prevalent over the natural world. And a lot of organisms are obligatory sexual, like ourselves. We're obligatory sexual. We can't make babies any other way. Some organisms can use both forms, asexual and sexual, and can get the benefits of both types. But we are obligatory sexual. Okay, I think that's the end of this PowerPoint. Yes, it is. Okay. So that's it. And like I said, this will be 203gene2, and that's the end of the lectures for chapter 4. So I think we go on to tissues next. And so I'll see you later. Oh, wait a minute. I gotta stop recording first.